They convinced you that being alone was a flaw, that silence meant something was wrong with you, that empty rooms, unanswered messages, and long, quiet nights were proof you were falling behind. They told you isolation was a punishment. They were wrong. What if the very thing you've been trying to escape, the loneliness, the stillness, the absence of noise, isn't your weakness at all? What if it's the beginning of your power? What if every hour you spend alone is not time lost, but time sharpening you into something rare, something controlled, something dangerous in the best possible way? Stay with me, because what we're about to uncover is not comfortable. It challenges everything society has trained you to believe about connection, success, and belonging. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Not for numbers, not for hype, but because this channel is about truths most people are too distracted to face. If you're still here listening, you're already different. And by the end of this, you won't see your solitude the same way again. For centuries, the world has praised the crowd and quietly feared the individual who walks alone. But when you study power closely, real power, you notice a pattern. The men who endured, who shaped history, who left legacies that outlived kingdoms, they all had one thing in common. They mastered solitude. Niccolò Machiavelli spent years observing rulers rise and collapse during the chaos of Renaissance Italy. He watched princes surrounded by advisors, generals guarded by armies, leaders praised by crowds, and he noticed something subtle. The ones who survived were not the most loved. They were not the most socially connected. They were the most self-contained. They knew how to stand alone without breaking. Society doesn't advertise this lesson. It cannot afford to, because someone who is comfortable alone cannot be easily influenced. Someone who does not crave approval cannot be manipulated through praise or rejection. Someone who does not fear silence cannot be controlled by noise. You've been told you need constant connection, you need validation, you need a circle, you need applause. But what if that constant dependency is the leash? What if your fear of being alone is the mechanism that keeps you compliant? There is a difference between isolation born of fear and solitude chosen from strength, and most people never learn that difference. In the 48 Laws of Power, Robert Greene warns against building fortresses. At first glance, it sounds like a condemnation of isolation. But look deeper. He is not attacking solitude. He is warning against fear-based withdrawal, the kind where you hide because you're scared, the kind where you isolate because you feel small. That kind of isolation weakens you. But strategic solitude, that's different. A weak ruler builds walls to avoid reality. A strong mind withdraws to understand it. Think about Louis XVI hiding behind the luxury of Versailles while France starved. Surrounded by flatterers, insulated from truth, he believed distance meant safety. It didn't. It blinded him. His isolation was denial. Now contrast that with Marcus Aurelius writing his meditations alone in a military tent surrounded by war, or Machiavelli himself exiled from politics, stripped of status, sitting in solitude and writing The Prince. He wasn't hiding from the world, he was studying it, refining his understanding of power without distraction, turning rejection into clarity. That is the distinction. The weak isolate to escape, the strong retreat to sharpen. From childhood, you were conditioned to fear being alone. Every story reinforces it. The lone figure is suspicious. The outsider is dangerous. The hero always has allies. It's subtle programming. Because systems thrive on participation, economies thrive on consumption, culture thrives on comparison. If you are comfortable alone, you stop chasing. You stop performing. You stop buying things to impress people you barely respect. You become difficult to steer. Arthur Schopenhauer understood this centuries ago. He wrote that the ability to enjoy solitude is a mark of intellectual and emotional richness. A person who can sit with their own thoughts without panic possesses a rare completeness, and society cannot monetize completeness. It needs you restless. So it labels solitude as dysfunction. It pathologizes independence. It turns self-sufficiency into something suspicious. But ask yourself something honestly. When you feel lonely, is it truly pain? Or is it the discomfort of facing yourself without distraction? Most people never sit alone long enough to meet who they really are. They drown silence with scrolling. They numb stillness with noise. They fear what might surface if the room stays quiet. But history shows a different pattern. When Newton was forced into isolation during the plague, he developed calculus. When Darwin withdrew into years of quiet study, he refined the theory of evolution. When Nietzsche walked alone through the mountains, he shaped ideas that would shake philosophy for generations. They didn't succeed despite solitude. They succeeded because of it. Creation requires quiet. Insight requires distance. Clarity requires space. The crowd produces repetition. The individual produces revelation. When you are constantly surrounded by voices, your thoughts blur. You begin to echo instead of originate. But when you step back, when you sit in silence long enough, the borrowed layers begin to peel away. You start hearing something unfamiliar, your own voice. That is where power begins. Machiavelli observed something consistent. Dependence weakens position. The moment people sense you need them, your leverage decreases. This applies to friendships, business, romance, everything. Fear of being alone traps you in dynamics that diminish you. But here's the paradox. When you learn to stand alone fully, your relationships improve, because now you are not negotiating from hunger. You're not tolerating disrespect just to avoid silence. You're not chasing crumbs because you fear emptiness. You can walk away, calmly, without drama, and that changes everything. Self-sufficiency is magnetic. Desperation is repellent. When you no longer need constant reassurance, your presence carries weight. You listen more. You speak less, you move deliberately, and people feel it. This is what I call strategic retreat. When amateurs feel themselves losing control, socially, professionally, emotionally, they chase harder, they text more, they argue more, they prove more, and in doing so, they weaken their position. The disciplined individual does the opposite. They step back, not angrily, not to punish, but to regain clarity, to restore balance, to rebuild internal strength. Machiavelli did not beg for his position back after exile. He withdrew, he focused, he studied, he wrote, and in doing so, he built something far more enduring than any temporary office. Retreat, when done consciously, reclaims your energy. It also triggers a fundamental psychological truth. People value what is scarce, but only when that scarcity is authentic. Pretending to be distant while internally desperate doesn't work. True withdrawal means redirecting your focus inward, toward growth, toward skill, toward mastery. Solitude becomes your laboratory. Schopenhauer described it as intellectual wealth, the ability to entertain your own mind without needing external stimulation. That kind of internal richness intimidates those who rely entirely on social input to feel alive. Your calm presence becomes a mirror. And not everyone likes what they see reflected. The crowd often resents those who walk alone, not because they are dangerous, but because they expose dependency. When you skip the party without explanation, when you decline gossip, when you refuse to compete for attention, people label you strange. Let them. Their discomfort is not your responsibility. Western culture celebrates extroversion, volume, charisma, constant visibility. But some of the most transformative minds in history operated quietly. Einstein working in a patent office, Emily Dickinson writing in near isolation, Wittgenstein retreating to remote cabins to think. Silence was not their weakness, it was their advantage, and now we go deeper. Solitude is not just physical separation, it is mental discipline. It is the decision to sit with your thoughts without fleeing, to face your fears without numbing, to observe your patterns without denial. Most people never reach this stage because the first wave of discomfort sends them running back to distraction. But you're still here. That matters, because the moment you stop seeing loneliness as a defect and start seeing it as raw material, everything shifts. Your silence stops being empty, it becomes potential. Once you stop labeling your solitude as a flaw, something subtle begins to change inside you. The silence doesn't feel like punishment anymore. It starts to feel like space. And space is powerful, because space allows you to see clearly. Most people have never experienced true psychological independence. Their thoughts are stitched together from headlines, opinions, trends, and conversations they barely remember. Their desires are shaped by comparison. Their fears are inherited. Their identities are assembled, not examined. But when you are alone long enough, without distraction, without performance, you begin separating what is truly yours from what was handed to you. That process is uncomfortable. This is where many people retreat back into noise, because in stillness, You encounter parts of yourself you've avoided, old insecurities, unprocessed anger, ambitions you buried because they felt unrealistic, regrets you never faced. Solitude removes the audience, and without an audience there is no performance to hide behind. But this confrontation is not weakness, it is excavation. The powerful individual understands that self-knowledge is strategy. If you do not examine your own fears, someone else will eventually use them against you. If you do not understand your own hunger, you will negotiate from it unconsciously. If you do not confront your own shadow, it will control you from beneath the surface. Solitude gives you access to that shadow. This is what Carl Jung described when he spoke about integrating the darker parts of the psyche. The traits you deny do not disappear, they operate in secret. But when you face them deliberately, when you acknowledge envy, pride, resentment, ambition, you gain authority over them. You stop being surprised by yourself. Machiavelli understood this intuitively. He wrote about human nature without illusions. He didn't pretend people were purely noble. He acknowledged ambition, betrayal, fear, and manipulation as realities. Because once you accept reality, you can navigate it. Denial makes you vulnerable. Awareness makes you strategic. Your solitude is the arena where that awareness is built. But here is where the transformation truly begins. After acknowledgement comes integration. You stop dividing yourself into acceptable and unacceptable parts. You recognize that your intensity can become discipline. Your anger can become drive. Your fear can become preparation. Your loneliness can become focus. Nothing inside you is useless if you're willing to understand it. Most people spend their lives trying to appear consistent. The sovereign individual spends their life becoming integrated, and integration produces stability. When you no longer reject parts of yourself, external criticism loses its power. When someone questions you, you don't crumble, because you already know your strengths and your flaws. You have met yourself in silence. There are no hidden surprises. This is why solitude creates inner gravity. You stop reacting impulsively. You stop chasing approval. You stop over-explaining. You move with intention. From there, construction begins. After you clear out borrowed beliefs and integrate your hidden traits, you are left with something rare, a foundation. And from that foundation, you can build deliberately, not according to trends, not according to pressure, not according to fear of missing out, but according to your own architecture. Sovereignty does not mean ruling others, it means ruling yourself. It means your emotional state is not hostage to text messages, your confidence is not tied to applause, your direction is not dictated by comparison. History repeatedly shows that those forced into solitude often discover their true strength there. Dante lost his city, his status, his security. Exiled from Florence, cut off from political life, he could have dissolved into bitterness. Instead, he transformed exile into literature that would outlive every rival who celebrated his downfall. The Divine Comedy was not written in comfort. It was written in separation. Seneca, banished under Emperor Nero, did not collapse under isolation. He wrote letters and reflections that shaped Stoic philosophy for centuries. He practiced mental independence so thoroughly that even exile could not remove his equilibrium. Henry David Thoreau stepped away from society deliberately. At Walden Pond, alone, simplifying his life, he discovered clarity. Not because he hated people, but because he wanted to understand life without noise. What he produced was not just a book, but a philosophy of deliberate living. Notice the pattern. Isolation was not their destruction, it was their catalyst. But here is an important distinction. Solitude must be structured. Unstructured isolation becomes rumination, and rumination, without direction, leads to stagnation. The difference between growth and decay in solitude is discipline. Machiavelli had structure even in exile. During the day he worked. At night he studied and wrote as if still surrounded by power. He maintained ritual. Ritual preserves identity when circumstances attempt to erode it. You must do the same. Create daily practices that anchor you. Write consistently. Train your body. Read intentionally. Build something tangible. Every action compounds. And in isolation, compounding is powerful because there are fewer interruptions. Solitude becomes productive when it has direction. Another principle, intellectual companionship. Being alone does not mean intellectual starvation. Books are conversations across centuries. When you read deeply, you're engaging with minds far beyond your immediate environment. You're expanding your circle without expanding your noise. Choose your influences deliberately. Engage with thinkers who challenge you, not just entertain you. Let them question your assumptions. Let them sharpen your reasoning. Build a mental environment that elevates you rather than distracts you. Then document your growth. Without external feedback, progress can feel invisible, so track it. Journal your insights. Record your training. Measure your work. Tangible evidence of improvement reinforces motivation, and when you re-enter social spaces, you won't need to explain your absence. Your results will speak. This leads to strategic re-emergence. Solitude is a phase, not a permanent retreat. The monk descends from the mountain. The strategist returns to the court, but they return changed. When you step back into the world after disciplined solitude, your presence shifts. You are less reactive, less needy, less eager to impress. You observe more. You speak with clarity. You move with intention. People notice the difference even if they cannot articulate it, because your center is internal now. And this internal center creates psychological advantage. When you're comfortable alone, you cannot be threatened with exclusion. When you do not fear silence, you cannot be intimidated by withdrawal. When you are content without constant validation, you cannot be manipulated through praise. That makes you unpredictable to systems that rely on emotional dependency. This is why solitude is often misunderstood. It is not antisocial, it is anti-fragile. But there is still a warning. If your isolation is driven by fear of rejection, fear of vulnerability, fear of failure, then it is not sovereignty, it is avoidance. And avoidance weakens you. True solitude is intentional. It is chosen for clarity, not forced by insecurity. Ask yourself, honestly, are you hiding or are you refining? Refinement requires courage, because it means staying present when discomfort surfaces. It means resisting the urge to numb yourself with distraction. It means sitting in silence long enough for deeper layers of thought to emerge. But when you do, something remarkable happens. You begin to enjoy your own company. Not in arrogance, not in superiority, but in stability. You realize that your mind is not an enemy. It is a resource. You discover curiosity about your own ideas. You explore concepts without rushing to share them. You develop patience, and patience compounds power. The crowd moves quickly. It reacts instantly. It chases trends. But the individual who is comfortable alone moves deliberately, and deliberate movement outlasts impulsive action. This is where loneliness transforms. At first, it feels like absence. Then it feels like space. Then it becomes strength. And once it becomes strength, you will never view it as punishment again. Because you will understand something most people never realize. The ability to stand alone without collapsing is not isolation. It is leverage. Now we enter the stage most people never reach. This is where solitude stops being a phase and starts becoming mastery. Many people experience moments alone. Few learn how to use them. They sit in silence, but they don't command it. They feel loneliness, but they don't transform it. They retreat briefly, then rush back into noise because the stillness exposes too much. But if you've made it this far, you're not running. Mastery begins with one simple shift. You stop reacting to solitude emotionally, and you start approaching it strategically. Silence is no longer something happening to you. It becomes something you step into deliberately. The first principle of mastery is ritual. Unstructured isolation weakens the mind. Structured solitude sharpens it. When Machiavelli was exiled, he did not dissolve into despair. During the day, he handled ordinary responsibilities. At night, he changed into formal robes and studied as if still advising rulers. That act wasn't symbolic vanity. It was psychological reinforcement. He refused to let circumstance redefine his identity. Your rituals do the same thing. When you wake up and train your body alone, you are reinforcing discipline. When you sit and write while the world scrolls endlessly, you are reinforcing focus. When you study instead of chasing distraction, you are reinforcing autonomy. Ritual tells your mind, I am in control here, and control builds confidence. The second principle is controlled exposure to discomfort. Most people cannot sit with silence for long. Within minutes they reach for a device. They need stimulation. They need confirmation that they exist. But when you deliberately practice stillness, something subtle shifts. The initial discomfort fades, the mental noise quiets, and beneath it, clarity begins to surface. You start noticing patterns in your thinking. You recognize fears that aren't real threats. You detect habits that drain energy. You see where you've been negotiating from insecurity instead of strength. This awareness is uncomfortable, but it is power. Because once you see your own weaknesses clearly, they lose their ability to surprise you, and the person who cannot be surprised internally becomes difficult to destabilize externally. The third principle is intellectual elevation. Physical solitude does not mean mental limitation. Instead of filling silence with meaningless consumption, you fill it with deliberate input. You choose ideas carefully. You expose yourself to thinkers who challenge you. You engage deeply rather than skim endlessly. You're curating your mental environment. Most people let algorithms shape their attention. You shape yours intentionally. That difference compounds. In a year, the distracted mind becomes fragmented. In a year, the focused mind becomes formidable. Solitude gives you the bandwidth to think deeply instead of reacting constantly, and deep thinking produces strategic advantage. The fourth principle is emotional neutrality. When you're alone and at peace, external validation becomes optional. You no longer depend on immediate responses, approval, or attention to feel steady. This creates a powerful shift in relationships. You stop over-texting. You stop over-explaining. You stop chasing reassurance. You respond instead of react. And when you respond calmly instead of reacting impulsively, your value rises, because calm signals control, and control signals strength. This is why the ability to walk away quietly is more powerful than arguing loudly. Strategic withdrawal creates space, and space shifts dynamics. When you become less available, not to punish, but because your focus is elsewhere, people reassess your importance. Scarcity triggers attention, but it only works when it is genuine. If you withdraw but remain internally desperate, nothing changes. True strategic distance means your attention is invested in growth, not in proving something. This is the psychological edge of solitude. When you need nothing, you cannot be threatened with removal. When you fear no silence, you cannot be manipulated with absence. When you're comfortable alone, you negotiate from wholeness, and wholeness is intimidating. The crowd senses it instinctively. People who rely entirely on social energy often feel unsettled around someone who does not. Your independence becomes a mirror. It reflects their dependency. And not everyone appreciates that reflection. So they label you distant. They call you intense. They say you're hard to read. Good. Depth is always harder to read than noise, but mastery requires balance. Solitude is a weapon, but like any weapon, it must be controlled. If you remain isolated too long without engagement, perspective can distort. The goal is not permanent separation. The goal is sovereign positioning. Think of it like this. The strategist steps back to observe the battlefield. The warrior retreats briefly to recover strength. The monk withdraws to refine clarity. But all return. Strategic re-emergence is critical. When you step back into social environments after disciplined solitude, your energy is different. You are less anxious, less reactive, less eager for approval. You listen carefully. You speak deliberately. You don't compete for attention. You command it quietly, because attention gravitates towards stability, and stability is rare. Most interactions in modern society are charged with subtle desperation, people seeking recognition, validation, reassurance. When you are internally anchored, you do not participate in that unspoken scramble. You become selective. Selective with time, selective with words, selective with energy, and selectivity increases value. Now let's go deeper into something most won't admit. Loneliness often feels strongest at night, when distractions fade, when noise decreases, when you are left with yourself. That moment is the test. You can reach for stimulation, or you can sit in it. If you sit in it long enough, you start noticing something surprising. The ache transforms. It stops feeling like abandonment. It begins feeling like expansion. Because in that silence, your mind stretches. It imagines. It plans. It reflects. It builds. The very sensation that once felt empty starts feeling powerful. That is transmutation. You are converting emotional discomfort into strategic clarity. And once you learn that skill, you're no longer afraid of being alone. fear disappears. And without fear, you cannot be cornered. This is why society subtly discourage deep solitude. A self-contained individual is harder to influence. Marketing loses leverage. Peer pressure loses impact. Social manipulation weakens. When you are sovereign internally, external systems must negotiate with you differently. But here's the crucial distinction again. If you isolate because you feel inferior, you shrink. If you isolate because you are building, you expand. Your intention determines the outcome. Mastery of solitude means choosing it consciously when necessary, not because you were rejected, but because you are refining. It means understanding that your time alone is not wasted time, it is preparation. Preparation for clearer decisions, preparation for stronger boundaries, preparation for more meaningful connections. Because here's the final paradox. The more comfortable you are alone, the healthier your relationships become. You no longer attach out of fear, you connect out of choice, and choice creates freedom. When two sovereign individuals connect, the dynamic is powerful. There is no clinging, no subtle manipulation, no dependency disguised as love or loyalty. There is alignment, and alignment is stronger than attachment. This is the level most people never reach, because it requires discipline. It requires sitting through discomfort long enough to discover that loneliness was not your enemy. It was your teacher, and once you learn from it, you no longer resent it. You respect it. You use it. You command it. Solitude stops being something you endure. It becomes something you enter with intention. And when you reach that point, you are no longer at the mercy of silence. Silence works for you. This is where everything comes together, where solitude stops being something you use occasionally and becomes part of who you are, not as isolation, not as withdrawal, but as sovereignty. Most people never reach this point because they keep waiting for permission. Permission to slow down, permission to disconnect, permission to choose depth over noise. But the truth is simple. The world will never validate this path for you. It benefits too much from your distraction. So you stop waiting. You understand now that there is a difference between exile and freedom. To the crowd, they look the same. Distance, silence, absence. But internally, they are opposites. Exile is imposed. Freedom is claimed. Dante was exiled from Florence, but in that exile he found clarity that comfort would have stolen from him. Thoreau was seen as withdrawing from society, but in reality he was stepping closer to life. Seneca was banished, yet mentally untouchable. History keeps repeating the same message, but only a few listen. Connection does not equal meaning. Noise does not equal life. Depth does. Once you accept this, your relationship with the world changes. You stop fearing disconnection. You stop interpreting quiet as rejection. You stop chasing constant stimulation to feel real. Instead, you weaponize focus. Focus is the most underestimated force of power in the modern world. Everyone wants attention. Very few protect it, and the one who controls their attention controls their direction. In solitude, your attention stops leaking. No constant notifications, no endless comparison, no emotional turbulence created by other people's chaos. Every hour of focused effort compounds. Learning accelerates, skill sharpens, thought deepens. What you build in silence lasts longer than what the crowd builds in noise. This is why Machiavelli's work outlived kings. This is why ideas forged in isolation shape centuries. This is why the quiet individual often moves history, while the loud one chases relevance. But solitude is not disappearance. It is positioning. Strategic engagement is the next evolution. You do not reject society. You choose how and when you engage with it. You're no longer reactive. You are deliberate. When you speak, there is weight behind your words. When you act, it is intentional. When you show up, people feel it. Presence becomes your influence, and presence comes from inner independence. You notice now how different interactions feel. You don't rush to fill silence. You don't overshare to bond. You don't explain yourself to be understood. You let things breathe. This unsettles people who are addicted to constant exchange, but it attracts those who value depth. Your relationships become fewer, but stronger, cleaner, more honest. You no longer connect to avoid loneliness. You connect because there is alignment, and alignment is rare. Here's the final truth most people never hear. Not everyone is meant to live in the crowd. Some minds are built for distance, for observation, for synthesis, for long stretches of quiet work that others would find unbearable. That doesn't make you broken, it makes you specialized. Just like some plants thrive in harsh climates that kill others, some people develop strength in conditions most avoid. Trying to force yourself into constant social immersion when your nature requires space will only weaken you. You'll feel drained, unfocused, fragmented. But when you honor your structure, everything stabilizes, energy returns, clarity sharpens, confidence settles, and from that stability, real power emerges. But remember this distinction clearly. If you hide from life out of fear, solitude becomes a cage. If you step away from noise to refine yourself, solitude becomes a forge. Your intention defines the outcome. Now, look at your current life honestly. The quiet moments, the empty evenings, the times when no one is watching, no one is messaging, no one is validating. What if those moments are not gaps to fill, but training grounds? What if every stretch of silence is strengthening something inside you that the world cannot take away? The crowd will never understand this. They will call it strange. They will call it antisocial. They will call it unhealthy. Let them. They are measuring life with tools that cannot detect depth. You are learning a different measurement, one based on inner stability, one based on self-trust, one based on the ability to stand without support. This is why someone who is comfortable alone cannot be manipulated. You cannot threaten them with exclusion. You cannot control them with approval. You cannot destabilize them with silence. They already live there. And that is why solitude is feared. As this video comes to a close, carry this with you. The next time you feel that familiar ache of loneliness, pause. Don't numb it. Don't run from it. Ask a different question. What is this moment preparing me for? What is it strengthening? What would happen if I stayed present instead of escaping? Because the crowd will never hear what silence teaches. They are too busy talking, too busy comparing, too busy performing, but you are listening, and that alone puts you ahead. If this resonated, if something inside you recognized what was being said, leave a comment. Share what solitude has taught you, or what you're still struggling to understand about it. This is a conversation most people are afraid to have, and that's exactly why it matters. Share this with someone who feels broken for being alone, someone who thinks silence means failure. Let them see another perspective, and if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Not for motivation, not for hype, but for clarity. This channel is for those who want to understand power, psychology, and themselves at a deeper level. Remember this: your solitude is not emptiness. Your silence is not weakness. Your loneliness is not a flaw. It is preparation. It is refinement. It is the forge where an unshakable self is built. And once you've built that self, the world can no longer move you, because you no longer need it to.